Welcome to the Little House Part 3, Shading with Ink. We'll use a value scale and we'll use hatching and scribbling as our pen techniques to complete this drawing. I'm going to start by finding a relatively dark value under the eave of the house. You can see that the value under the eave of the house is pretty much a number 4 from our value scale, and the lines that I'm using lean towards vanishing point number 2. The lighting on this drawing is from the left and from above. So all of the planes that face the left or face the sky will be tints from our value scale, and the planes that face down, like under the eave of our house, or planes that face towards the right will be made of shades. I'm just working on the small planes that recess into the house from our windows. Around the round windows, the value will be darker along that inset plane at the top of the window, and the value will become lighter as we work our way down towards the bottom of the window. Under the doorway will be a dark value, probably a 4 or a 5, and we'll go ahead and make the sides of our steps leading up to our house, the planes, at least the vertical planes that face towards the right, we'll make those a 4 from our value scale as well. Now your marks might look different from mine, but as long as you're using value number 4 on your 6 value scale, then you'll be creating a wide range of value even from the beginning of our drawing. On the vertical plane that faces the left, we've used value number 3 from our value scale on our stairs. And we'll use probably a value number 3 or 4 on the inside right plane of our doorway's column. Now the wall, the retaining wall, it should have the same value arrangement as the stairs so far. So the top will stay lighter, and the vertical planes of the bricks, of the stones, will be probably a 3 right now. Value scale number 3. Value number 3 from our scale. We'll leave the top white for now of the retaining wall, the top of the retaining wall. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and start working on the right side of our house. Just trying to put pretty consistent vertical lines on this vertical plane. We don't want the lines to go at an angle or to curve. The vertical lines help to describe the direction this plane moves through space. We're starting with about a value number 3 or 4 on the right side of our house. This value will gradually get darker. On the front of the dormers, the dormer on the left, we used a value number 1 and probably a value number 3 on the front of the dormer on the right. I'm going to use some small hatching marks on the edge of our driveway and then use the second value scale, the one on the bottom that you can see in the lower right portion of your screen, the value scale made of scribbling marks, to begin working on the natural portions of our drawing. This is like a shrub or a tree line that goes behind our house, and I'm pretty much using value number 3 from our scribbly value scale just to tone this shape. Some of it may get darker in time, but we'll start with value number 3. Now to start the shape of value in the tree, I'm going to go ahead and use value number 4 or 5 from the scribbled value scale along the bottom and along the right side of our tree in the background, the tree that's on the other side of our garage. Notice the irregular shape of the shadow. The foliage on a tree does grow in a mass, but it is irregular. It's not like the smooth surface of a sphere. And so this shape of darkness is irregular along the edge of the tree, but also out into the middle of the tree. Some of this shadow reaches out into the middle of the tree like fingers. The shapes of dark shadows that you create in your tree should be in a similar place as mine, but they don't have to be exactly the same. Each tree is its own unique experience. And as the sun moves across the sky and as the wind blows, the shapes of these shadows change a little bit. Okay, so for the remaining bulk of our tree, where the darkest shadows are not, I'm just going to use value number 2. Value number 2 from our scribbly value scale, just to fill in the remainder of the tree for now. We'll go in and complicate the tree eventually. We'll add a third value, but for right now, the trees are pretty much going to be made from, at least the foliage of the trees, value number 2 for the lights, and then of course value number 4 or 5 for the shadows in our tree. And that will at least darken them enough to separate them from the white of our page. We'll treat the shrubbery around our house the same way we did the trees. Using my vanishing points again and my ruler, I'm going to go ahead and put some marks, lay some marks across the roof, just to use as a guide to follow for the shading, so that the roof feels a little bit like there's a pattern, a little bit like the pattern of shingles that we might see on a roof. So I've just put 2 or 3 lines in from each vanishing point, and I'm adding a few more lines between those at an angle according to the vanishing points. I'll use some shorter lines between those that we created with the vanishing points, just to complete the roof's shingle pattern, and start shading them in. The left half of our roof should stay lighter than the right half of our roof because the light is coming from the left. So I've used probably value number 3 on the left half of the roof, and I'll use at least value number 4, maybe value 5 even, on the right half of the roof. Now the right half of the roof is blending in with the eave, so I believe it's time to make the shadow under the eave of our roof even darker. I'm going to bring it all the way down to a 6 now. Let's use the value number 3 on the dormer on the right, and the dormer on the left, the side of that dormer, we'll bring that down to about a 5 to match the right side of our house's roof. The roof over the garage should match the roof along the left half of our house. Okay, so a lot of the values are in place. It's just time to bring them down. So the sides of our step, the planes that face or lean towards the right of our page, I'm going to bring those down to a 5 now, just to increase the contrast, make the light seem brighter as our shadows get darker. The vertical planes on our stairs facing towards the left, we'll bring those down 1 step on the value scale as well. And it's time to work on the lighter planes of our house. I'm using quick strokes. A quick stroke makes a thinner line, which feels like a lighter line than a slow stroke. So keep that in mind while you're working on your hatch marks as well. I'm going to hatch and cross hatch in the trees. Along the trunks of the trees, the right half of those trunks should be darker than the left half since the light's coming from the left. Of course, if we do a little bit of crisscrossing or cross-hatching, then that'll impart a slightly different surface texture to our trees than what we see on our house. And that should help the viewer understand that the surface of the tree is a little different than the surface of the house, even if we don't go into great detail to describe the bark. So I'm creating value on this tree with shorter lines, shorter hatch lines that don't extend all the way across the tree. And I've started along, at least for the main part of the trunk, along the right edge of the tree. And I'm building up layers, working farther and farther out into the middle of the tree from the right edge, just to start the shadow on the tree. So the right edge of the tree so far has received 3 layers of hatched marks crisscrossed over one another in different directions, and that already starts to create a sense of light. Of course, the entire tree will be shaded with hatch marks. None of it will remain white. So as the values on the right half of the tree get darker and start to catch up with the values on the left half of the tree, I'll have to continue building up the layers of hatch marks along the left, gradually stretching some marks all the way across the trunk of the tree just to pull all of these different hatch marks, these different layers together. I've tried to stay as light as I can on the front of the house and still bring it down so that it's slightly darker than white. So it's as light as I can go. It's like a 1 or a 1.5 on our value scale. The marks are a little closer together but they were made very quickly so that they're thin marks compared to the number 1 on the value scale. Now, where the eave hangs over our house, it may cast a little bit of a shadow across the top of our house. So I'm going to go ahead and put in another series of marks just below the eave so that it feels as though there's a little bit of a value change as we move up the house from the bottom to the top. I'll continue with that along the darker side of our house as well. I think I'm going to actually darken the planes that are the right side of our house completely. Let's go ahead and bring those down a whole step on the value scale, down to value 5. If you're already at value 5, then you're probably good on the right side of your house. Don't forget the little cast shadow that the column might create across our small porch. And I think I'm going to go ahead and add a little more value using the scribbling technique into the tree line that goes behind our house along the horizon, just in the bottom half. It's time to work on the windows. Now, the windows are usually really dark in the daytime because the light outside is always brighter than the light inside. So I'm starting with an irregular shape that's approximately a value 3 or 4. That would be maybe the reflection of whatever's in front of our house in the window on the front of the house. And then I'm going to use value number 2 and go all the way across the window on the front, which will also darken the shape along the bottom of that front window. All the way, that'll bring that shape, that reflected shape, down to a value number 5. We'll work in a similar way on the round windows along the side of our house. They're going to have to be pretty dark, at least as dark as the side of the house. Of course, if this were a night scene, the windows would be lighter than everything else because the light inside of the house would be brighter than the light on the outside of the house. I am looking for some details now, some smaller linear hatched marks in our tree's trunk, just to complicate it a little bit, just to make its surface feel a little more irregular than a smooth cylinder. And at this point in the drawing, it's just about building up our value so that our range is as wide as possible. I'm looking for a third value now in the foliage of the trees, and along the grass, or where we would have grass, I'm going to use a mark that is a little bit of a combination of the hatching marks we've used and the scribbling marks we've used. So think about this like scribbled lines, and pretty much scribbling lines in a direction on the ground that will hopefully communicate that there's a little bit of a hill leading up from our wall to our house. So these are scribbled hatched lines. Value approximately number 1 on our value scales. Very light, barely touching the paper with my pencil, with my pen, even picking up the pen as I go so that the marks are disconnected. And these lines change direction a little bit as they get up towards the house and the tree. They level off to some degree. They don't become horizontal, but they do bend a little to become slightly more horizontal next to the house than they are in front of the house. We can add a few extras in along the right of the house, between the house and the tree. Those extra lines will feel like a shadow on the ground cast by the house. That shadow might crawl up the trunk of your tree a little bit. Alright, we see the same kind of thing happening to the left of our stairs in the grass. We've got some lines that are somewhere between our hatched lines and our scribbled lines, and we're using that to create the value and the texture on the ground, separate from the type of texture we see along or in the house or the trees. I'm going to go ahead and build up the value a little bit next to the lower set of stairs so that it feels a bit darker as we go down that hill, and maybe a little darker next to the steps leading up to the house. We're almost done. Just a few of those marks that lean towards our vanishing point on the other side of our driveway, the marks in our grass, the marks that are creating our grass. I would say the tree is probably down to about a value number 4 on both edges, along both edges of the trunk and the lower half of the trunk. One side of the trunk is in shadow because it's farther from the light source, and the other side is partially in shadow, created by the house that's next to it. As you're following along, just keep comparing my values to my value scale and compare your values to my value scale and to your value scale. I'm just trying to make any planes darker that I think need to be darker to help balance out the drawing, to help balance the amount of visual weight in our drawing. All right, so the fronts of our stairs are pretty dark. I actually think the tree line in the background on the left half of our drawing needs to be darker. If I make that tree line darker, it'll add a little bit of visual weight to this side of the drawing that may balance out the heaviness of the tree on the right half of our drawing. Okay, now I apologize, this may be a little bit hard to see because of my hand, but through the middle of the tree in the background, I'm building up our value just one more value step on the value scale so that our trees have 3 values, light, medium, and dark. Speaking of darkness, I think we'll add a little more value to our wall and then use value number 1 across the top of the wall, and we'll use lines that slant towards vanishing point number 2. The stairs get lines as well, the tops of our stairs, the treads where we would put our feet, those lines should slant towards the vanishing point as well. Pretty much value number 1 across the tops of our stairs, but close to the corner where the stairs meet each other, you may get a little bit darker where one stair may cast a little shadow over another. Very light value across our driveway, and we're done. And that completes The Little House Part 3. Thank you for following along with all 3 parts in this series.